So, hi everybody, welcome to our lecture today. I'm glad to be the moderator today, or do the moderation today. And my name is Paulus. I'm studying electrical engineering in a master program here at FIU. And we are also glad to have our lecturer Phoebe Koundouri from the Athens University here today. And yeah, very welcome at Germany. We already heard that you travel quite a lot around today virtually. So this is really possible in our days. And yeah, before I do the introduction, just a quick recap of the technical stuff. We will have a recording. It's a part in the FAU tool. In the end, you will get it uploaded, and also the lecture slides, and you will get there. Exactly. In the end, we have 60 minutes of lecture, and afterwards we have 30 minutes of question and answers. So you can already type your questions in now, or during the whole lecture we will collect them and ask them in the end. Within the tool, you can also vote. And if there are questions who are voted up or have really a huge amount of votes, we will make these questions first, because a lot of people then are interested in it. So also use the voting possibility within the question and answers. Hopefully you already took a part in the survey, the demographic survey we put in there. Professor Koundouri already said she's also really interested in the results there, because she's working also in interdisciplinary study program and wants to push this forward. So this is also interesting for her, and of course also for us. Yeah, and if you have any feedback or critique, you can put this in the chat, like in the FN Q&A tool, the FNA tool. You can put your questions, and if you have anything apart, any links you want to share with everybody, you can put this in the chat. But yeah, this is not for the question and answers. So right, I hope I did everything, all the technical stuff. I introduced them, and now I do a quick introduction of our professor. So Professor Koundouri is a world-renowned environment economics professor at the School of Economics at the Athens University. So she's here from Greece, or basically we can welcome you from Greece, right? And she's also the co-chair of United Nations Sustainability Development Network for Europe. Professor Koundouri acts as a scientific advisor to various multilateral institutions, for example, the European Commission, the World Bank, the UN, the NATO, the WHO, World Water Council, and numerous other national and international foundations, organizations, and she is also advised national governments across the world. She's also an editorial member of more than 30 specific journals, and she is listed in the most cited women economists in the world, with 15 published books and more than 465 published peer-reviewed scientific articles, book chapters, and reports. And as you maybe can see, then you can also be a great scientific and a great mom, because we had this discussion just in Germany due to our election soon. So this is really possible. So very welcome to FIU here. We are glad to have the lecture with you.
Thank you so much for the invitation to speak, and thank you so much for your kind introduction. I have my assistant here. She's my young daughter. I have another two. So I am a person that really tries to combine motherhood and career, and I can tell to all the female members of the audience that this is absolutely possible, and that what is needed is to have a partner that really believes that that is important for females as important as males. So
Thank you for this great message in the beginning of the lecture. And I think this is a motivation for all the female students and yeah, also all the female listeners in the audience. So thank you therefore.
Thank you so much. So let me start, and please feel free to post questions on the chat, and I will try to answer all of them during the Q&A section of this lecture. So today I will be focusing on how we can recover in a sustainable way from the pandemic, how we can co-develop the future vision for a sustainable Europe and co-design the pathways for moving for the transition to a sustainable Europe. And these pathways will be found in the interface between research, innovation, and policy. I've been working on the interdisciplinary structures for understanding the interaction between people and nature for 25 years. I'm a firm believer, like I talk with Paulus and Corina, sorry for not pronouncing the names very, and Francesca. I hope the pronunciation is not too terrible, but we've been talking about the importance of interdisciplinary work. You can find a lot of information about my work on my personal website, which you can see on the screen. And there you will see that I work with a big team. My team is composed of 150 researchers, and our aim is to achieve design systems of interaction between nature, the economy, and the society that are sustainable and resilient. Now, nowadays we are at the simultaneous handling of three big problems, three big tsunamis: COVID-19 tsunami, the pandemic, and of course we try to control the epidemic using social distancing measures, and of course biomedical research for the vaccine. The deployment of the vaccination has started. We are facing issues with mutations of the virus, but it seems that international collaboration and coordination is the key for both the biomedical research, but also the social distancing measures. Nobody is safe until everybody is safe, and this is the main message from this particular pandemic. Now, an even bigger tsunami is the recession, the economic recession that is caused by COVID-19. And up to now, we've been focusing, all countries around Europe, but also around the world, have been focusing on short-term measures, trying to avoid the pandemic turning into a major economic and financial crisis that will long outlast the health crisis. What we've been doing is that we try to keep the workforce employed, even if guaranteed, government channel financial support to the vulnerable citizens. Governments try to safeguard the SMEs against bankruptcy, and they try to put into place policies to support the financial system as not performing loans mount. At the same time, we've been developing fiscal packages comparable to the crisis-related loss of GDP in order to finance by national debt the recovery. And these fiscal packages are more directed towards medium and long-run measures. The implementation of the fiscal packages will start basically in September, at least in Europe, and it is then that is the right time to assess how clean, how sustainable, how resilient will the recovery will be. Now, the third crisis that we are simultaneously facing is the mother of all crises, is the climate crisis. The climate crisis is basically the urgency of limiting global warming to a maximum of an increase of 1.5 degrees Celsius, beyond which the risk of extreme weather events and poverty for hundreds of millions of people will be significantly increased. At the moment, there is no country in the world that is not experiencing the drastic effects of climate change. And this translates into economic losses of in the hundreds of billions every year, and also translates in millions of human lives lost over decades. In the UNEP emissions gap report that was published last year, we know that the nationally determined contributions of the countries around the world are inadequate to achieve the Paris Agreement goals. And I will come back to explaining what this Paris Agreement is. And so it is clear that in order to recover back better, we need to find a way to simultaneously handle these three crises. In this talk, I will refer to a report that I co-authored. I co-led with Jeffrey Sachs, a US economist at Columbia University, who is also the president of United Nations Sustainable Development Solutions Network. This Sustainable Development Solutions Network is a global network that has members, universities and research institutions. It has hundreds of thousands of members across the globe. And its mission is to transfer, to communicate solutions for the sustainable development that are developed in universities, and communicate these solutions, sustainability solutions, to the other stakeholders that are there to implement them. Who are the other stakeholders? Well, it's politicians, policymakers, the civil society, the businesses, the financial institutions, the NGOs. The Sustainable Development Solutions Network also has a European network, and I am honored to co-host it. It has over 400 members and 13 national and regional networks. And the mission of SDSN Europe is to align the European recovery with Agenda 2030. So I'm going to explain what this Agenda 2030 is in case somebody that has not heard about it. But our main endeavor is to play an active role in shaping a sustainable and resilient Europe. The report that I will talk about is a report on the transformations that are needed for the joint implementation of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals of Agenda 2030, the UN Agenda 2030, and the European Green Deal. So this report tries to sketch pathways for a green, digital, job-based, and inclusive recovery for COVID-19 pandemic. These are the co-authors of the report, and let's look at the main messages. First, we have a moral responsibility to build for better, and the moral responsibility is to the future generations. The COVID-19 pandemic recovery packages will be financed by national debt. So they are loans that will be paid by you, the young people. So we need to spend this money in a way that will transform your future into a sustainable future, in a future where the economy is efficient, the society is, there is equality, social equality and cohesion, and at the same time, the environment is resilient to shocks. And it is ecosystemically resilient. The good news is that there is an economic case for building better. Recent simulations that we did on the effect of green recovery plans worldwide confirm that a green economic stimulus is more growth enhancing than a return to normal stimulus, which would merely boost current and sustainable consumption and production processes. Beyond fiscal stimulus that is expected to boost aggregate demand, the current crisis calls for transformative public investments that will shape a sustainable, fair, green and digital transition and leverage private sector investment. It is important to leverage private sector investment because even the huge money that are going into the recovery and resilience facility of Europe, for example, are not enough for a sustainable recovery. We need the private sector in the game. And to get the private sector invest in the real economy, it is important to reduce uncertainty. In order to reduce economic uncertainty, you need to make sure that you are using the recovery money, the money from the recovery and resilience facility, in order to make public infrastructural investments that will produce positive multipliers, growth multipliers, and positive job multipliers, and in this way, reduce economic uncertainty and convince the private sector to make real investments in the real economy. Of course, our long-term vision is the United Nations Agenda 2030 with the 17 Sustainable Development Goals and the 2015 Paris Agreement for climate. The European Green Deal provides the right level of ambition and direction towards this long-term vision. This particular report connects the 4 major policy initiatives, the SDGs, the European Green Deal, the European semester process, and the EU Recovery and Resilience Plan to support policymakers with actionable strategies that can guide an EU-wide recovery in a sustainable way. Now, what is the policy framework that we have? We have in the SDGs, this is the United Nations Sustainable Development Agenda that was signed by 193 countries in 2015 in New York. And this is the only global agenda we have together with the Charter of Human Rights. And this includes 17 goals to be achieved by 2030. They refer to all aspects of economy, nature, and society, and they need to be achieved by 2030 in 9 years. Within these goals, we have 169 targets. And for each of these targets, we have indicators to measure them and assess the process of each and every country in the world with regards to the implementation of these goals. A few months later, in 2015, we have the signature by 197 countries of the Paris Climate Agreement. This was an agreement between these countries to keep global temperature right below 2 degrees Celsius. Every year since 2015, the United Nations Sustainable Development Solutions Network produces a report that shows how well each country has achieved SDG 13, which refers to climate action, but also all other SDGs in each and every country of the world. Actually, we report on 166 countries, and we work on reporting on additional countries, but data is missing. So this is what is keeping us from reporting on the other countries. In 2013, the Intergovernmental Panel for Climate Change has announced that the limit with regards to global temperature should be at 1.5 degrees Celsius. This is the maximum increase we can afford given the current technology that we have. Beyond this, the standard of living will be worsened significantly due to the increase in the severity and frequency of extreme weather events, which are 95% of them are connected to climate change. So climate change basically produces extreme weather events that risk the livelihoods and of the people. So the message here is that we try to protect environmental stability, not because we care about the environment, but we cannot live in an environment with an increased temperature above 1.5 degrees Celsius compared to the average temperature of the planet at pre-industrial level. So the struggle for climate neutrality, it's not about nature. Nature is flexible. The planet will survive, but humans will not be able to survive in this planet if temperature increases. So the whole thing is about us humans and not about nature. It's about our future. In 2019, during the New York Climate Week in September, we announced as a Sustainable Development Solutions Network the 6 major transformations to achieve the SDGs. Basically, the claim here was that 17 SDGs are too many for any country to prioritize. So we've introduced a structure that can operationalize their implementation. This structure basically explicitly signals the fact that the SDGs are not 17 independent goals. They are integrated, and basically the 17 SDGs are one goal, the goal of sustainable development, and no one can be implemented without the others. The 6 transformations that government should focus on are education, gender and inequality, health, well-being and demography, energy decarbonization and sustainable industry, sustainable food, land, water and oceans, sustainable cities and communities, and of course the digital revolution for sustainable development. And these pathways are quite handy because they reflect the way most governments are structured. So they reflect which ministries need to be involved in the transformation, in the investments, and in the policy revisions that are needed for facilitating the implementation. Late 2019, the European Commission announced the European Green Deal, the new growth strategy of the European Union with 4 major axes: climate neutrality by 2050, a reduction of pollution, clean tech leadership for European companies, and of course, inclusiveness, leave no one behind. The 2 main driving forces for the implementation of the European Green Deal is the European Climate Law, a binding agreement for climate neutrality, legally binding agreement for climate neutrality, and of course the European Climate Pact, which is this pact between civil society and the European Commission to work together to accelerate the transition to climate neutrality. And of course the European Green Deal comes with 1 trillion budget, some of it coming from EU budget and the other to be leveraged by public-private partnerships. And at the same time, we have the European semester process, which is the biannual process where the European Commission makes recommendations to the member countries in order to achieve better alignment with European goals. And of course, we know that in 2020, we have the coronavirus, the long-run response of Europe with regards to the coronavirus was the recovery and resilience package that we've put together. And this recovery and resilience package represents an addition to the multi-annual financial framework of Europe of 750 billion. Of this 750 billion, the 672.5 billion will go to the recovery and resilience facility. And the good news is that this recovery and resilience facility remains within the spirit of the European Green Deal. Our growth strategy is still green, and our pathways should be green and digital. And this is also consistent with the SDGs, the global agenda. For any investment that will be financed by the recovery and resilience plan, 37% of the money should reflect climate-related expenditure. The investment should respect the do no significant harm principle to the environment, and 20% of the investment should be digital-related expenditure. So our future is green and digital, and the flagship areas for investments that will be financed by the recovery and resilience plans are power up, meaning clean technologies and renewables, renovate, meaning energy efficiency of buildings, recharge and refuel, meaning sustainable transport and charging stations, connect, meaning rollout of rapid broadband services, modernize, meaning digitalization of public administration, scale up, meaning data cloud capacities and sustainable processes, and reskilling and upskilling, meaning education and training to support digital and green skills. And this is the structure in which the recovery and resilience plans of each of the 27 countries are written. In 2020, just before the end of 2020, we had another development. The member state leaders agreed for a 55% increase in the ambition with regards to the reduction of greenhouse gas emission. So we moved from an ambition of 40% reduction to a 55% reduction by 2030. And of course, the ambition of climate neutrality by 2050. Now, recently, in April 2021 and not 2020, so let me correct my slide here to be sure that we have it correct. The Commission announces the agreement for the European climate law. So this is the first legally binding agreement for a climate neutral EU by 2050. So the aim is that net greenhouse gas emissions should be reduced by 55% by 2030 compared to what we have in 1990, and we should become neutral by 2050. The climate law prioritizes emission reductions over removals, establishes a European Scientific Advisory Board on climate change, and these senior scientific experts will provide advice and reporting on EU measures in order to achieve the Paris Agreement goals. It also proposes intermediate climate target for 2040, and also engages with sectors of the economy that choose to prepare indicative voluntary roadmaps towards climate neutrality by 2050. It is also indicated in the climate law that the EU wants to strive for achieving negative emissions after 2050. And at the same time, it makes explicit that it should be implemented together with the package of measures for the EU taxonomy. The EU taxonomy has also been announced a few days ago on the 21st of April and aims in improving the flow of money towards sustainable activities across the European Union by enabling investors to reorient investment towards more sustainable technologies and businesses. So basically what this EU taxonomy does is that it identifies explicitly which measures are sustainable, which investments can be considered sustainable, and then explicitly says we are only going to fund sustainable investments. At the same time, it creates a proposal, it puts forward a proposal for corporate sustainability reporting. So a new directive on how companies should report on their sustainability achievements, so every company should report with regards to how sustainable their production practices are. And at the same time, it also proposes the duties of asset management with regards to sustainable management. Now, this is the policy scene in which we have to structure our transition pathways to climate neutrality. The first section of our report tried the cross-mapping between the SDGs, the European Green Deal, and the EU semester process. What was interesting to see using machine learning approaches is that the European Green Deal and the SDGs are mirror image. The dark green boxes indicate explicit reference in the European Green Deal text to SDGs targets, and the light green indicates implicit reference. So you can see that the two policies are mirror images, which is good because the politicians need to understand that we don't have two different policies, two different agendas. The financial institutions need to understand that, the business sector needs to understand that. Of course, you see some white boxes, which basically indicates the basic truth that SDGs are more holistic than the European Green Deal. They cover more areas, and they are in this way superior to the European Green Deal. But the good news is that we have one holistic European global policy that we can focus on, and we can try to translate these policies into implementation for the transition to sustainability. Now, we wanted to merge all this with the country-specific recommendations of the EU. As I explained before, every 6 months, the EU produces recommendations for each of the 27 countries with regards to fiscal policies, investments, taxation, social policies, education, finance, public administration, labor market policies, and so on. So what we wanted to investigate is whether what the European Commission proposes is really aligned with the deficiencies with regards to the implementation of the SDGs. So what we did is cross-map the SDG performance of each country, which is something that we publish as UNSDSN. This is Sweden. We've done this for each of the 27 countries. I started with Sweden because Sweden is the most sustainable country in the world. And this is how her map looks. Green, an SDG that is green, it means that it has been achieved. An SDG that is yellow, it means that challenges remain. An SDG that is orange means significant challenges remain, and red means major challenges remain. And you can see that even the most sustainable countries in the world at the moment has achieved only 4 SDGs. Now, aligning these, the arrows at the bottom show the trend. So if you have an arrow that is upward looking and it's green, it means that by 2030, you will achieve that goal, or you will remain at full achievement of that goal. However, if you have an arrow that is horizontal, then you have stagnation. Now, cross-mapping this with the CSR, the country-specific recommendations of the European Commission, we can see how many of the significant and major challenges are addressed in the country-specific recommendations. For Sweden, we have 50% alignment, which means 50% of the significant challenges in implementing the SDGs are addressed by CSR. For Germany, we have a 63%, and this is the map of your country with regards to the achievement of the SDGs. No SDG has been achieved. Quite a few are with some challenges remaining, but unfortunately 3 face major challenges, and another 5 face significant challenges. And we have 63% alignment with the SDGs. And this is Greece, one of the problem countries, I would say, in member states. And here we have alignment between the SDGs and country-specific recommendations of 80%. In total, we have a 72 efficiency ratio with regards to achieving the SDGs in the 27 countries. And please remember that for this alignment, we go deeply, not just in the 17 SDGs, but in the 169 targets within each, within the 17 SDGs. And for Europe, we have in total, a good alignment between country-specific recommendations and SDG achievement, but there is still space for further alignment. With regards to prioritizing the European Green Deal policies, what we did is that we've identified the policies that are associated with major SDG challenges and significant SDG challenges, and we identify for each of the 27 countries which are the policies of the European Green Deal that should be prioritized in order to handle these challenges. I should say here that the European Green Deal has 9 different policies, one focus on biodiversity, farm to fork, sustainable agriculture, clean energy, sustainable industry, building and renovating, sustainable mobility, eliminating pollution and climate actions. And the policies that should be prioritized on average are the farm to fork policy, which focuses on environmentally friendly food systems, sustainable industry, elimination of pollution, and climate action. Based on these 3 mapping, we then move forward into identifying technological and investment pathways for the transition to sustainability. Now, the EU climate neutrality by 2050 means that in 2021, the EU will unleash new revised climate and energy legislation to align with the 50% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions target. And there are many policies that will be revised. It's not just the climate law that I referred to that has just been introduced. It's not just the EU taxonomy that has been introduced. The emissions trading system will be revised. The effort sharing regulation will be revised. The energy taxation directive will be revised. The carbon border tax will be introduced. And you see on the figure next in my slide. What is the target? To reduce emissions to climate neutral situation, and at the same time increase GDP. And in order to achieve this, as I said in the beginning of my presentation, we need systems innovation. We need a systemic multidisciplinary approach. Systems innovation can be understood as a combination of systems thinking and the process of innovation so as to enable transformative change within complex systems. And the European Green Deal is trying to achieves a transformative change in a very complex systems of the economy, the society, and the environment. And we need to simultaneously address multiple objectives and promote policy instruments and technological solutions that can be used by various sectors of the economy. With regards to the objectives, we need to focus on decarbonization, environmental sustainability, economic prosperity, social inclusion. With regards to policy instruments, we need to focus on public investments, phasing out subsidies to fossil fuels, market mechanisms, regulatory frameworks, regulations on land use. And of course, we need to identify the best, most efficient and smart technological solutions mixture. With regards to decarbonization, our report suggests focusing on 4 sectors: power, progressively phase out traditional sources and introduce an efficient mix of renewable energy solutions. With regards to industry, we recommend focus on hard to abate segments like cement, iron, steel, and petrochemicals. With regards to transport, we recommend focusing on roadways and railways and airways and navigation, both short haul and long haul. And with regards to building, we suggest focusing on guidelines for new buildings and retrofitting strategies. Now, in a systems approach, we need to be very careful with regards to complementarities, and there are many complementarities in managing the complexity of the energy system. We need to see the complementarity between variable renewable energy sources, between different zero carbon technologies, different public and private investments, different nature and engineered systems, different mitigation and adaptation systems, centralized and decentralized solutions, actions and strategies, and research and development activities from both the public and the private sector. And we also identified roadmaps with 6 different pillars for decarbonization: zero carbon electricity, electrification of end users, green synthetic fuels, smart power grids, material efficiency, and sustainable land use. And all in all, we identify in a nutshell that the road to climate neutrality will be achieved by renewable energy sources, nature-based solutions, and of course, circular economy. These are the 3 main drivers to climate neutrality. We have the technology. The technology is cheaper than fossil fuel, so the transition can be made. And of course, in order to make the transition, we need detailed plans exploring all options for decarbonization and their associated costs, and integrating these plans in the national energy and climate plans and in the nationally determined contributions for the implementation of the Paris Agreement. So we need broad policy frameworks with clean goals, technology roadmaps, regulatory assignments to stakeholders, strong systems of deliberation, public awareness, reporting on outcomes, holistic approaches, and of course, focusing on energy saves and efficiencies on the demand side. Circular economy is important because it reduces the cost of production. It's important for reducing emission. And of course, it creates jobs and it saves, it reduces the environmental footprint of production. So changing our production model and our consumption model from a linear economy model that produces non-recyclable waste to a circular economy model that is based on principles of designing out waste and pollution and keeps products and materials in use and regenerates natural system is a very good mobilizer and accelerator for the sustainability transition. And it is some work that we do allows mapping of the reduction in the environmental footprint of the transition from the linear to the circular model, and it also allows monetization of this reduction of the footprint. Monetization is important. It is important to be able to show in a cost-benefit analysis how much the economy and the society gains from moving from a linear to a circular model. And this is something that has not been yet implemented, and we are currently implementing it in our work. Now, decarbonization needs money. In order to achieve the 55% goal, we need an additional investment of 350 billion per year. And you can see that the investment is relevant for all sectors of the economy: power grid, power plant, boilers, industry, residential territory, and transport. So we need to think about our finances. Now, until 1980, governments intervene only since 1980, governments were asked to intervene only for the purpose of fixing market failures. Now, with the triple tsunami that we are facing with the pandemic and the economic recession and climate crisis, governments are asked to make significant long-term investments to support rapid recovery from the coronavirus shock. So this calls for a significant entrepreneurial role for the state to provide patient finance, and we know that businesses do not invest unless they see an opportunity for growth. So we need to turn climate mitigation and adaptation into opportunities for investment, and here innovation is key. What we need to do at the macro level, we need our central banks to reconceptualize financial stability and include in their missions climate and environmental risk. At the meso level, we need the national public investment organizations to provide positive sources of long-term patient finance. And at the micro level, we need to give the capacity to companies to understand that those that switch towards sustainable green practices sooner will be the most competitive, the most innovative, and the most profitable ones. At the same time, we need to provide the implementation of sustainable finance practices. As I indicated before, the EU taxonomy has been unleashed. This is a classification system for sustainable economic activities, which creates a common language for investors and lenders and scale up private-public investments to finance the transition to climate neutrality. Here, it is important to understand that it is not only enough for financial institutions, the European Investment Bank, the European Central Bank, the national central banks, the commercial banks to say, I'm only going to finance sustainable investment, and this is what a sustainable investment is. You also need to provide the companies with capacity, both the public companies and the private companies, with capacity to report with regards to sustainability and report in an integrated way. At the moment, there are two separate narratives that companies face. One telling how profitable a company is, and the other how good is for people and the planet. In this report, we suggest the possibility for a simple hybrid measurement system that combines social and environmental impact with standard measures of financial performance. And this is important to be implemented, to be deployed around Europe and the world. Another important element of this sustainability transition is job creation. And in this report, we show that the investments in line with the European Green Deal can lead to approximately 1 million new jobs in energy and energy-related sectors by 2030. Here, it is important to understand that the new jobs will be skilled jobs and very few will be unskilled, which calls for a massive investment in upskilling and reskilling. Then another important element is how you deal with regressive effects of mitigation policies. We need to see, we need to study the distributional effects of key EU climate policies until 2050. And this is what we did in the general equilibrium framework. And we show that 4 policy measures that we identify redistributing revenues through lump sum transfers, implementing targeted energy efficiency measures, long-term job retaining programs, and funding subsidies for new low carbon technologies via a general taxation. These 4 key mitigation policies can be implemented and achieve more equality, increased GDP, and increased employment. And this is important because it shows that mitigating the negative social impacts of climate policies is essential to ensure a broad support for the energy transition. Of course, we need to care for the vulnerable and care about social equality. And for this reason, it is important that our report showcases that regressive effects can be fully offset with targeted policies and can have progressive effect in all EU regions. And the bigger progressive effects are in the Southern Europe and Western Europe, which are the more vulnerable areas of Europe. And this is what we call the just transition of the European Green Deal. The transition has to be equitable, it has to include everybody, leave no one behind, and this is the proof that this can be done. Finally, we understand that in all crises, timing is crucial, so the post-pandemic financial stimulus are huge, of course, in terms of the amount of money that are involved, but they are also huge in terms of the policy responsibility that is involved. So policymakers need fast guidance to steer between health protection, economic relief, and climate resilience. So that's why we introduce some criteria that can allow inclusive consultation of the different recovery measures that can be implemented. And we separated these measures into measures with environmental impact and measures with economic and social impact, and we also relate them to the SDGs. This is something that policymakers can use in order to build the recovery and resilience measures. So the main message from this report is that the return to normal economic stimulus is environmentally unsustainable and economically inferior to a green stimulus. We have a once-in-a-generation opportunity to direct economic growth based on European Green Deal and the SDGs, which are luckily the 2 sides of the same coin. And we should focus on transformations based on the SDGs and the European Green Deal for the transition to a green, digital, job-based and inclusive recovery from COVID-19. And these results that relate to Europe are quite consistent with the results that relate to the whole of the world. I am one of the commissioners of the Lancet COVID-19 Commission, which is a high-level commission for the recovery from the pandemic. And the main of the Green Task Force that I lead is that the recovery packages across the world should finance transformations for a green, digital, and fair future. Recent commitments to achieve net zero greenhouse gas emissions by around mid-century in Europe, but also in China and other major economies can provide the needed momentum for deep transformations. At the moment, 1/3 of global assets under management are now environmental, social, and governance based. And this momentum is important because it guides capital flow, and we should build on this momentum. At the moment, the financial resources devoted for post-COVID recovery are largely insufficient for a green recovery. And at the moment, low-income countries need and emerging markets and urgently need financial support to recover back better. And thankfully, last month, the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank convinced major economies, including the the US, the European Union, China, and other G20 countries to signal their support for an allocation of 650 million worth of IMF reserves assets, special drawing rights, to assure that governments in low-income countries and middle-income countries have the money to recover back better. So the IMF and the World Bank are responding for low-income countries, and the European Commission, beginning September, will start absorbing the recovery and resilience money in order to start investing in a sustainable recovery. So in September, we are about to start seeing how much our recovery will be green and digital and sustainable. A new development that happened a few days ago was President Joe Biden's climate change summit, which assembled 82 of world carbon emissions, 73 of world population, and 86 of world economic output to commit to bold climate action. And this is important because we had basically the whole of the globe, the US, Canada, European Union, China, Japan, Korea, India, United Kingdom, Brazil, aligning with deep decarbonization and in investments for the zero carbon transition through solar, wind, hydro, geothermal, biomass, and nuclear energy. And what is also very indicative of the policy situation, I want to give you this final smell of the political momentum, is that Brazil, that until today was, until yesterday, just before, until during Trump administration, was a climate denier, announced an intention to reach net zero emissions by 2050 by scaling up nature-based solutions in the vast Amazon rainforest. At the same time, the Chinese president committed to becoming climate neutral by 2050 instead of 2060 that was announced. The Russian president and the Indian president also promised climate action without offering a lot of detail, but also promised. So we have the bigger emitters committed to climate action. And of course, the European Union continues with a vast deployment of new policies on biodiversity, farm-to-fork, renovation, the climate law, different climate actions, action policies, and of course, energy policies, and circular economy policies, and the EU taxonomy that I already referred to. And all this will accelerate the transition. So we have the political momentum, we have the technology, we need to start implementing. And to implement, we need clear and explicit technological pathways, financial pathways, and policy pathways. And this is what is happening now. I will close this speech by introducing very briefly my team. I lead a team that is called Cluster for Sustainability Transition, and it basically composed of the research lab on research on socioeconomic and environmental sustainability that I founded and direct at the Athens University of Economics and Business, the Sustainable Development Unit that I direct at the Athena Informatics Research Center, and of course, EIT Climate Kick that I direct. This is the biggest public-private partnership of the European Union under the European Institute of Innovation and Technology that accelerate innovations for climate neutrality. And of course, in this cluster, we have the Sustainable Development Solutions Network. I chair the European and the Greek chapter. And we work on research and innovation projects. We work on innovation acceleration and deep demonstration, and of course, on education and training programs. We have 4 areas of focus. Each slide you see, it's one different project, mostly European and global projects with big consortia and their own budget lasting from 3 to 5 years. Our first thematic area is climate change mitigation and adaptation, green digital just recovery pathways, circular economy, nature-based solutions, and systems innovation approach. Our second thematic area is blue growth. We have a 4 Cs initiative trying to sketch pathways for sustainable blue growth in the Mediterranean, the Black Sea, the Caspian, and the Aral Sea. We also have a global initiative on sustainable shipping and ports. Many projects on using marine resources, energy production from marine resources, marine protected areas, sustainable shipping, sustainable ports, sustainable management of the interaction between coast, sea, and oceans. And of course, a big accelerator, European accelerator, providing mentorship and finances for innovations that are relevant for the decarbonization of the marine sector. Our third thematic areas is water, food, and energy nexus, smart agriculture, and smart urban water systems. And in August, we start working on a big European 10 million project funded by the European Research Council on developing, designing the next generation smart water systems. And here we bring together engineering, water engineering, optimal control, decision theory, decision science and economics, and machine learning. All of our projects are interdisciplinary. Like I said at the beginning, almost all problems are interdisciplinary, so we need interdisciplinary solutions. So the research has to be interdisciplinary. Our last area of focus is innovation acceleration. We have a general startup accelerator, and we have a thematic accelerator, like I said before, on maritime sector. And we also run programs for professionals in retraining and reskilling with regards to sustainability. The program is called Pioneers into Practice, and of course many global events for the sustainability transition. I will stop here and thank you for your patience, and I am ready to take any questions that might exist.
Yeah, first of all, thank you so much for your introduction. There was so much input, and I really liked also that you linked up between the different systems like the SDGs and the European Green Deal, that you get the links in between, that they are not just individual like parts, ideas, strategies, that they are there's a combination, there's a link in between. Thank you. This is the main point I also can take out of. So just to everybody else, we provide the slides to you, like the FAU students get it and stood on. Everybody else just write us an email then we forward it to the people who were taking part in this lecture. So before we start the question round here, you still can put your questions in the Q&A tool. You can vote on them, you can comment them, and you can also give us feedback. Please do this in the chat. Write us what you took. Write us feedback. Write our professor feedback. What you learned today. Write how you liked it. And we are always happy to get some feedback out of this virtual session here. So feel free there. So then let's start with the most voted question here. There are already quite a lot of questions. I am pretty sure we won't make them all, but let's try our best. The first question is agriculture included in the EU taxonomy package? Because the agriculture sector is getting a lot of money of the EU, and the EU's gap is up to now far away from supporting a sustainable change. Can you answer this?
The agriculture sector, it's included, but not decisively, which means what? It means that the EU taxonomy, the package of financial measures, explicitly refers to agriculture, and it says that we will delay our decisions with regards to what is sustainable in agriculture until we have the revised common agriculture policy. But rest assured that agriculture is a big emitter of greenhouse gas emissions. It's also an important shaper of land use, and the European Green Deal has two policies that are explicitly relevant to agriculture: sustainable agriculture and sustainable food systems, the farm to fork policy. So agriculture is one major area that will have extensive regulation, and of course the EU taxonomy will have a very detailed specification of which activities, which investments in agriculture and livestock can be considered sustainable. But we need to wait a bit more.
Okay, so there's a way to go still. I think this is also like a message you transported also in the end. What about, like, for example, Brazil? This is also a really latest news message to me. So going on with the next question, there's also a huge criticism about the goal of 55% reduction of greenhouse gas emissions until 2030, basically saying it is not enough to fulfill the Paris Agreement. What do you think about it? Is aiming the 55% reduction aim the right way to bring both together, the environmental protection and the economy?
The 55 target is much better than the 40% target. It's a huge increase in the ambition. It is not enough. We need a 68% reduction in order to be on track for the climate change agreement. But my personal view is that if we achieve the 55, if we achieve for all the 27 countries to revise their national and energy plans to achieve the 55% by 2030, then the technological acceleration is such that we will have between 2030 and 2050 to cover whatever missing ground that we have. So I would say, let's try to achieve the 55% without complaining. And let's have at the back of our mind the need for further acceleration between 2030 and 2050. And by then, this further acceleration will be possible without devastating the economy, because we have a huge pace. Now with the fourth industrial revolution, we have a huge pace of technological advancements. So if we expect by 2030, we will have the deployment of the hydrogen economy, then that would make things much more easier, faster, and cheaper. So I say we are good with the 55. And I say that after being in endless meetings with the Commission and understanding how difficult is to keep a balance between the different countries, because at the moment there are countries in the Commission that are climate neutral, some others that will be climate neutral by 2030 or 2030 plus, like Germany, and there are some others that have no plans for climate neutrality. So in order to get all of these different countries to agree on a 55 increased ambition is already a big deal.
Just, yeah, you said Germany already has a plan. I just read the headline today in the news that the German government wants to push the climate neutrality to 2040. At the moment, it's still 2050. And there was I don't know if you noticed it, like last week, there was a huge process at the court, and the highest court of Germany told them this is not enough. And now they announced, like the German government announced, that they want to push the net zero emission goal to 2040, so 10 years earlier. This is also quite a really new headline we got today. But according to this, there's the next question, which says, you seem to be quite optimistic about the political momentum and the overall direction of the policies, where the policies are going. But aren't you afraid that there still might be some governments, also like governments in the future, which are completely refusing to take action on climate change?
In Europe or outside Europe?
It's more generally, but I think you can also just respond accordingly to Europe first.
In Europe, I'm not afraid of that. Europe is a climate neutrality leader. They showcased, they paved the way forward for the whole of the world. And there is a lot of deep understanding that climate neutrality is good for the livelihoods of the citizens. It's cheap, because it's cheaper than fossil fuel, but it's also cheap because it reduces the catastrophes that extreme climate events produce. So if you avoid a flood, if you avoid a forest fire, if you avoid a tsunami, the benefits are so huge, both in terms of human life, but also in terms of the economy, that it becomes so obvious that the transition needs to be made. And at the moment we have the technology is cheaper than the fossil fuel technology, and we have the money in terms of the recovery and resilience plan and the MFF to deploy the technology. So I think those that are deniers are just gonna be left behind. And I think nobody will be left behind as long as we invest on capacity building. So people should be able to participate in this transition, and participation means employment. So somebody who works in a fossil fuel plant should be retrained to work in a windmill plant, in a solar plant, in a circular economy, and so on. And so many more jobs will be created than those that will be lost. So in Europe, I'm not afraid. And I'm not afraid about Canada or other countries that are already in this transition. Now, I am also not afraid about rich countries. If Russia, that has started, that is so rich in terms of natural gas, has started understanding the reduced interest in this export from the whole of the world. I think it becomes obvious that it's the economics, the underlying economics and finances that will streamline capital flows into sustainability. Where I'm a bit more reluctant to be optimistic is the less developed world and the emerging markets. There, unless the rich countries provide solidarity and support for the transition, the money is not there, the engagement of the stakeholders in terms of awareness is not there, and the technology is not in the countries already, and the policy scene has so many other problems that it will never prioritize climate change, even after a big tsunami disaster, even after a big flood disaster. So there we need solidarity from the developed world. The money exists, we need to reallocate it. And to reallocate money, you need to create incentives for the investments to be allocated in this particular climate neutrality, biodiversity, resilience transition. And so what we need is to streamline innovation and investments in these areas. And the good news is that those that have already invested in these areas are the most profitable. Last year, the most profitable funds were the most sustainable funds. But for the less developed countries and emerging markets, we need to show solidarity and provide the capacity and the money to make the transition.
Like you already said a message I want to deliver to everybody who's listening. Like a finance market has a huge influence. So think about where your money is, in which bank or bank account your money is, in which, like, if you have some kind of storage in the money, where do you put it on? And this is also an impact. And I also really, I'm a little curious about your phrase, because you said the less developed countries are like a bottleneck, more or less. Because I like, as I heard that the Paris or the Paris Agreement, it was the impact of the small countries and also the islands and so on, which which have a huge influence, or which get a huge influence, that they pushed forward that 2 degrees is not enough. So I think it's also the responsibility of some of them, especially the islands, that we have this 1.5 degree aim in the world. That's also
and you know why? Because the most vulnerable countries to climate change are the small islands and parts of the developing world. So this wealth that definitely needs capacity and money in order to make the transition are those that are are the most vulnerable to extreme weather events caused by climate change. So we have a moral responsibility to help them, and we should understand that unless this is what I say about climate change, but it only became clear with the pandemic. Unless everybody is safe, nobody is safe. And the pandemic is a result of biodiversity loss, which is hugely affected by climate change. So the pandemic, basically what it did, is because of deforestation, because of loss of biodiversity, we have the wildlife being unphysically close to humans, and it made it much easier for the zoonotic virus to make the cross-species leap. And in the last few decades, we had many instances like this: HIV, H1N1, MERS, SARS, Ebola. So all these zoonotic viruses are caused by biodiversity loss. And I can tell you something that is documented in the Lancet Commission for COVID-19 that I participate. There are other 6,000 documented viruses that can make at any time the cross-species leap, which means that it is highly likely that we have similar pandemics or similar epidemics in the years to come. And it is also likely to have two viruses at work at a time. So unless we get our resilience back, unless we invest in bringing back biodiversity using nature-based solutions, we are in very dangerous and uncharted territory.
I think a really, really important message out there, which like also the combination or the interaction between like sustainability, forests, and the pandemics. Before I go on with the next question, we have a second survey for you. Our Professor Koundouri is also interested about your opinion about it. It's about the study programs. I just started, you can answer it. Meanwhile, it's not a huge issue. And we go on with the next question. And it's a really like great question. You think Corona is more a risk or a chance?
Corona is more of a risk or a chance. What do you mean? I don't understand the question. Risk is when you know the probability of different events. This is how we define risk. We have an uncertain event, and we have the probabilities, known probabilities for the different outcomes of this event. There are instances that we don't know the probabilities of the events, where we have deep uncertainty, and these are the instances that refer to climate change. So basically, one additional difficulty with climate change is that we don't have information. We don't know when extreme weather events will become so vast or so frequent that we will not be able to live with. So we have to be precautionary in how we handle it. The pandemic is the outcome of what I said before, is careless reduction in biodiversity and deforestation that brought wildlife and people close together and made it highly possible for the zoonotic virus to make the cross-species leap. So it is something, it was a risk, well identified. We've been warning about this risk for many years, even decades. We have similar zoonotic viruses instances that make the cross-species leap since the 80s. But there was no political response with regards to this. And the HIV did not become a pandemic. Why? Because it was not diffused so easily. The coronavirus that we are facing now has these two very difficult characteristics. First, it is airborne, so it is diffused very, very easily. And second, it's not lethal. So the person who carries the virus carries it for a long time. The probability of death is low. It's important, but low. And the end result is that the virus is diffused widely, and we don't just have an epidemic, we have a pandemic. But this does not mean that we didn't have similar instances in the past. Like I told you, we have many instances in the past, and there were warnings that were disregarded, unfortunately.
And in terms of the economic situation, you said about the investment programs of the EU, which would not have occurred without the virus. So is this like in terms of the economy, is it like a chance, or is it also like the risk? Because as you in the beginning said, like maybe we get a big economic crisis. So what do you think about it?
I think that the economic crisis is huge, but I think we will recover. We will recover. The expectations is that we will recover fast, and the fast recovery is, of course, related to the huge recovery packages that are put to place. The big risk is the following: is to use this money in a way that does not produce investments in the real economy. So in a way that does not produce big transformative infrastructural investments. And at the end of the day, we spend this money, we have to repay this money, and at the same time, we don't achieve the transformation in the economy that is needed in order to get on a sustainable path. This is a very serious risk. If we go down that line, I think we are in big trouble, because since the great financial crisis of 2008, we have not really recovered. Since that crisis, we've been naming our monetary policy called helicopter money. Basically, the central banks have been issuing money and throwing that in the economy, but still real investments in the real economy are at all-time low. This shows that what is needed is a transformation of the system in a way that can increase investment security and can convince the private and the public sector to make real investments and produce positive growth and job multipliers. And I think the only option for investments are these sustainable investments, renewable energy, hydrogen, circular economy, nature-based solutions, climate adaptation projects, because these have a very high dividend. They produce economic money, economic profits, they produce jobs, they protect from climate disasters, and they protect the health of the people. So these are profitable investments. They can create transformative, they can transform our social and economic system, and hopefully they will put the global economy into a positive growth multiplier road.
Okay. Now we are going for two more questions. The next question is, I've heard that the SDGs have a discrepancy, like for example, the SDG 8, economic growth, and climate action, because it's often told that climate action can just be achieved by degrowth, by economic degrowth. What do you think about this statement?
I totally disagree. Totally. Climate action and climate neutrality, in all the simulations that I did or other economists did, prove that they are much higher in terms of growth potential, economic growth. So the transition to sustainability, decarbonization, all these new energy, renewable energy mix, circular economy again, can produce very important growth multipliers, and they can produce job multipliers. And if you go back to the great financial crisis of 2008 and simulate the investments, you can see that those that were brown or neutral had much lower growth and job multipliers than the green investments. So we have evidence for the great financial crisis. Research simulations of this crisis also confirm that climate action and growth go together. And for me, green and digital is the only pathway that can bring back growth and jobs.
So, and the final question I have here is also like an adding question to the last, I think, or the last question we had. You think the GDP is a good indicator of the progress and wealth? Don't you think we need to turn form of the fixation of GDP curves, or do we need any other indicator for the wealth of states?
Definitely, and there is a lot of work on this. GDP measures only a few things, and it definitely does not measure natural capital. However, in all investments, at least all that I've analyzed in my 25 years of careers, and I've analyzed many across the 5 continents, the bigger part of any investment is natural capital. You have, for an economic investment, you need natural capital, human capital, and physical capital. What we measure and what GDP effectively measures is the growth in terms of physical capital, and sometimes it measures the human capital as well. However, it is not measuring natural capital, which is the biggest part of any investment, but also the highest, if you monetize it, if you translate it into money, is the highest wealth asset of any country. So GDP has to be revised in order to include that. Another aspect that the GDP does not include is life satisfaction. And there is a big literature on happiness and happiness economics that tries to include that. What people care about is not just actual absolute number of money and wealth, but also provision of social services, they care about their social network, they care about education and healthcare, and they care about how much free time they have and how much the quality of their surroundings, their environment, the security in the region they live, the quality of education and health facilities, and so on. Unless GDP integrates these measurements, it is a very poor indicator of well-being, let's say. It only measures some financial flows, which are definitely not inclusive, not holistic of the well-being of people. As UNSDSN, we partner with other institutions in publishing the World Happiness Report, and there you can see that the most happy countries in terms of providing to their citizens all these elements that I indicated before are definitely not the countries that are rated as highest with regards to GDP. So we need to revise our KPIs because we've reached a level of development that people are explicitly aware of the fact that the environment, social cohesion, public services, education, and also financial wealth are important for their well-being.
Yeah, thank you very much for this really great statement. Final statement you had. Thank you very much to all the visitors who were there today. There were about 95 visitors we had in here. And I'm sure there are quite a lot more in the video channel, video recording afterwards. So thank you for your questions. Unfortunately, again, we could not ask all and answer all of them, but I think the most important and most voted ones we could deliver to our professor here today. Thank you for being here. And there's now an announcement. Corinna, please correct me if I'm wrong. I think next week there is no lecture, right? Because, like next week there's a break, so we see each other in 2 weeks. So you have a break next Wednesday, do whatever you want on Wednesday afternoon next week. We see again in 2 weeks. I do not have the timetable here at the moment, but sure you can find it everywhere you know about the lecture. We load up the video. It takes some time. Just have a little bit of patience to get access to it. Is there anything else to announce? Franziska, Corinna, just the announcement. The organization team is meeting again after the lecture here. So just stay if you want to join us or have any ideas how to progress in the next semester, because we're already planning how it's going on in the winter term. So therewith, I want to close this lecture. Thank you very much, Professor Koundouri, for being here, being with us, answering our questions, bringing so much knowledge about the process of the European Union to us. Thank you very much, therefore.